Welcome to the moments before darkness. We cover the moments when everything
From
changes.
inside a Virginia Beach jail, Cola Beale confesses to murder. Caught on camera, the 30-year-old admits to shooting his girlfriend, his cousin, and a father figure in a matter of days.
And most of the time when people see something happen like this, the person that do it don't ever get to tell their side of the story. I snapped. Yes, I snapped.
Beale is charged with 3 murders, 2 of the shootings happening in Virginia Beach, the other in Norfolk.
I shot him in the head.
Beale said he shot and killed his girlfriend, Czavi'er Hill, when the two got into an argument over their relationship.
I was seeing red. So when I put the dog in the room, I was about to set the dog on fire. And she told me, she said, no, don't do nothing to the dog. You can take me and do whatever you want to do to me instead and let him.
In March 2022, a 30-year-old man sat down for a jailhouse interview and talked about 3 murders he committed in less than a week. He didn't seem remorseful. He didn't seem afraid. According to reporters who interviewed him, he seemed to want the world to know what he'd done. His name was Cola Beale, and the person he killed first was the woman who loved him. Her name was Czavi'er Hill, 31 years old. She was an entrepreneur and motivational speaker, working to build something meaningful with her life. Friends describe her as someone with vision, a woman who saw possibilities and worked to make them real. She posted on social media about goal setting, about pushing through obstacles, about becoming the person you're meant to be. She talked about faith, about second chances, about not giving up on people. And she was in love with Cola Beale. Beale was 30 years old, just a year younger than Czavi'er. He had a criminal record that included multiple convictions. Court documents show prior arrests for robbery and assault. In 2018, he was convicted of sexual battery involving a minor and required to register as a sex offender. He'd spent time incarcerated. By many accounts, this was a complicated relationship, but Czavi'er believed in redemption. She believed people could change. Her social media presence reflected someone who looked for the good in others, who gave second chances, who thought love could be transformative. Cola Beale would make her pay for that belief. To understand what happened in those 6 days in March 2022, you need to understand who these people were. Czavi'er Hill was building a life. She had entrepreneurial ventures in progress. She did motivational speaking, encouraging others to pursue their dreams. She maintained an active social media presence where she shared inspirational messages and updates about her work. Cola Beale was her boyfriend. According to people who knew them, the relationship had its tensions. There were moments when friends questioned whether this was healthy, whether Cola was good for her. But Czavi'er was an adult, independent, making her own choices. In the weeks before March 2022, something changed. According to later reports, there had been conflict in the relationship. Czavi'er had been reconsidering things, talking about what she wanted for her future. But there were 2 other people in Cola Beale's life who would become central to this story. Clifton Baxter was 73 years old. He was more than just an acquaintance to Beale. He was a father figure, someone who had taken Beale in, tried to help him, believed he could turn his life around. Baxter lived in Virginia Beach and had known Beale for years. Downey McLean was 32 years old. He was Cola Beale's cousin. Family. Someone connected by blood, by shared history, by the complicated bonds that tie families together even through difficulty. In late March 2022, all 3 of these people would be dead. And Cola Beale would be the reason why. The timeline of what happened spanned 6 days across 2 cities in Hampton Roads, Virginia. On March 22nd, 2022, Czavi'er Hill was killed. According to court documents and Beale's own later statements to media, he killed her in Virginia Beach. The details of exactly what happened that day remain partially unclear, but what is clear is that Czavi'er Hill, entrepreneur, motivational speaker, someone with plans and dreams, died at the hands of her boyfriend. Beale disposed of her body in a location that wouldn't be discovered immediately. He then continued on with what, to outside observers, appeared to be his regular life. 2 days later, on March 24th, 2022, Clifton Baxter was killed. The 73-year-old man who had tried to help Beale, who had been a father figure to him, was shot to death. Court records indicate the killing occurred at Baxter's Virginia Beach residence. Then, on March 28, 2022, down in McLean, Beale's own cousin, was killed in Norfolk. 3 people, 6 days, all connected to Cola Beale. But Beale didn't turn himself in. He didn't confess voluntarily. He was arrested on March 31st, 2022, after police investigation connected him to the crimes. Police began investigating when Czavi'er Hill was reported missing. Her family knew something was wrong. She wasn't answering her phone. She hadn't shown up where she was supposed to be. Investigators started where they always do, with the people closest to the victim. Cola Beale, her boyfriend, was an immediate person of interest. As detectives dug deeper, they uncovered something disturbing. The investigation revealed connections to not just Czavi'er's disappearance, but to 2 other violent deaths that had occurred in the same time frame. Clifton Baxter had been found dead in his Virginia Beach home. The death was being investigated as a homicide, and Downing McLean had been killed in Norfolk under circumstances that raised immediate red flags. The common thread, Cola Beale. Cell phone records, witness statements, and forensic evidence began painting a picture. Beale had been in contact with all 3 victims around the times of their deaths. His movements tracked the locations where the crimes occurred. On March 31st, 2022, police arrested Cola Beale and charged him with 3 counts of murder. Here's where this case takes an unusual turn. After his arrest, Cola Beale didn't stay silent. He didn't lawyer up and refuse to speak. Instead, he gave interviews to media outlets from jail. Multiple interviews. And in those conversations, according to reporters who spoke with him, Beale talked about what he'd done. He didn't express remorse. He didn't claim innocence. According to news reports from those who interviewed him, Beale spoke about the murders in a way that suggested he wanted people to know. He wanted his story told. One reporter described the interviews as chilling, not because Beale was overtly threatening or dramatic, but because of how matter-of-fact he seemed, like he was discussing something unremarkable. Why would someone do that? Why speak to media from jail about crimes you're charged with? Psychologists who study criminal behavior note that some offenders have a need for recognition, for their actions to be acknowledged, for their story to be known. It's not about fame in a traditional sense. It's about control, about ensuring they remain at the center of the narrative even after they've been caught. Cola Beale wanted people to know what he'd done, and he made sure they did. Let's talk about the victims here, because each of these 3 people had a completely different relationship with Cola Beale, and understanding those relationships helps us understand what happened. Czavi'er Hill was his girlfriend, the woman he was in an intimate relationship with. According to patterns documented in domestic violence research, intimate partner homicide often occurs when the victim tries to leave or when the abuser's control is threatened. Friends later indicated there had been tension in the relationship, that Czavi'er had been reconsidering things. In relationships with controlling partners, the moment of leaving is the most dangerous. That's when the abuser realizes their power is slipping. That's when verbal abuse and intimidation can escalate to lethal violence. Czavi'er believed in second chances. She believed in redemption. And those beliefs may have kept her in a relationship longer than was safe. Clifton Baxter was a father figure. At 73 years old, he had taken Cola Beale and tried to help him, believed he could turn his life around. Court documents don't detail the exact nature of their dispute, but what's clear is that Baxter, someone who had extended kindness and support, was shot to death just 2 days after Czavi'er was killed. What happens in someone's mind that allows them to kill a person who helped them, a person who believed in them? Research on familial violence shows that offenders often target people closest to them precisely because those relationships carry the most emotional weight. When someone feels wronged, feels disrespected, feels their authority challenged, they strike at the people who should be safest from them. Downing McLean was family, Beale's cousin, 32 years old with his own life, his own story. The reasons for his murder remain less clear in public records, but the fact that Beale killed his own blood relative suggests something had escalated beyond rationality, beyond the normal boundaries most people wouldn't cross. 3 different relationships, 3 different contexts, but one common element. Cola Beale deciding that these people's lives were his to take. Have you ever tried to understand how someone crosses that line? How they look at another human being, someone they know, someone they've shared time with, and decide to kill them. The evidence against Cola Beale came from multiple sources and built a case that prosecutors would later use to secure convictions. Forensic evidence, DNA analysis, ballistic evidence from the shootings, and physical evidence collected from crime scenes link Beale to all three murders. Digital evidence. Cell phone records place Beale at or near the locations where the victims were killed at the times the murders occurred. His phone's movement patterns tracked with the timeline of events. Witness testimony. Multiple witnesses placed Beale with the victims shortly before their deaths or provided statements about Beale's behavior in the days surrounding the murders. Body recovery. Czavi'er Hill's body was eventually located in a location that matched information investigators had about Beale's movements. The discovery confirmed what family members had feared, that she hadn't disappeared voluntarily, that something terrible had happened. Beale's own statements. The jailhouse interviews, while not formal confessions to police, provided details that corroborated evidence investigators had already collected. His willingness to discuss the crimes gave prosecutors additional material, though they didn't rely solely on his media statements. The evidence painted a clear picture. Cola Beale had killed 3 people over the course of 6 days in March 2022, and there was no reasonable doubt about his guilt. Czavi'er Hill's family held memorials where friends and loved ones remembered her as someone who inspired others, who worked to make positive change, who believed in people's potential. Social media tributes poured in from people she'd mentored, people she'd encouraged, people whose lives she'd touched through her motivational work. Her mother and family members had to process not just the loss, but the circumstances. The knowledge that someone Czavi'er loved, someone she'd invested in, someone she'd given chances to, had taken her life. There's a particular cruelty in that, being killed by the person you believed in. Clifton Baxter's family mourned a 73-year-old man who had extended grace to someone who didn't deserve it, who had opened his home, his heart, his resources to help a younger man find his way, and who was repaid with a bullet. Friends described Baxter as generous, as someone who genuinely tried to help people who were struggling. His death wasn't just a loss. It was a betrayal of everything he represented. Downing McLean's family had to grapple with the fact that family killed family. That Cola Beale had murdered his own cousin. Court records and news reports don't detail much about McLean's life, but what's clear is that he had people who loved him, who had to identify his body, who had to bury him far too young. 3 families shattered. 3 sets of people who now live with permanent absences at holidays, birthdays, ordinary Tuesday afternoons when they want to call someone who's gone. And all of it preventable. All of it the result of one man's decision to value his own feelings, his own control, his own ego over 3 human lives. Let's sit with some difficult questions this case raises. First, how did Cola Beale remain free long enough to commit these murders? He had a prior conviction for sexual battery involving a minor in 2018. He was required to register as a sex offender. He had a documented history of criminal behavior. The system knew who he was, yet he was out in the community. He was in relationships. He had access to weapons. He had freedom of movement. This isn't about blaming parole officers or probation systems for the actions of individual offenders. But it does raise questions about what monitoring looks like for high-risk individuals, about what resources exist to prevent future violence, about whether the system is designed to actually protect people or just process them through cycles. Second question, what could have saved Czavi'er Hill? Friends later indicated there had been concerns about the relationship, but concern alone doesn't trigger intervention. Even if Czavi'er had sought a protective order, and there's no public evidence she did, those are pieces of paper. They don't stop someone determined to commit violence. Research consistently shows that the most dangerous time for victims of intimate partner violence is when they're leaving or planning to leave. That's when control is threatened. That's when intimidation becomes lethality. Czavi'er may have been at exactly that moment. And the support systems available, shelters, legal protections, police response, are often reactive, not preventive. Third question, why did Beale kill Clifton Baxter and Downing McLean? The motivations here are less clear in public records. What disputes led to their deaths? What conflicts escalated a murder? Some criminologists studying multiple murder cases note that after the first killing, psychological barriers break down. Once someone has crossed the line into taking a life, subsequent killings become easier. The internal prohibition has been shattered. It's possible that after killing Czavi'er, Beale was already in a psychological state where killing again required less internal resistance, where other conflicts, whatever they were with Baxter and McLean, could escalate to lethal violence more quickly. But this is speculation. What's fact is that 3 people died and 1 man killed them all. Cola Beale's case fits into documented patterns of intimate partner homicide and familial violence. According to data from the Bureau of Justice Statistics, women are significantly more likely to be killed by intimate partners than by strangers when perpetrators have prior criminal histories, especially involving violence or sexual offenses. The risk of lethal violence increases substantially. Research on domestic homicide shows that certain factors correlate with increased risk. Prior threats, access to weapons, substance abuse, history of violent behavior, and situations where the victim is attempting to leave the relationship. Czavi'er Hill's case reflects these patterns. Her boyfriend had a violent criminal history. There were apparent tensions in the relationship, and the murder occurred during what appears to have been a period of relationship instability. As for the murders of Baxter and McLean, they fit patterns of familial violence where conflicts within families or close social networks escalate to homicide. Research from criminologists studying interpersonal violence shows that many homicides occur between people who know each other, disputes between relatives, friends, or associates that turn deadly. But understanding patterns doesn't make violence inevitable. It makes it predictable. And predictable violence can theoretically be prevented. If systems are in place to intervene, if resources exist to support victims, if communities can identify and address risk before it becomes lethal. The question is whether we prioritize that prevention. Cola Beale faced justice in 2 separate court proceedings because the murders occurred in 2 jurisdictions. For the Virginia Beach murders of Czavi'er Hill and Clifton Baxter, Beale was convicted and sentenced in July 2024. He received 2 life sentences plus additional time for related charges. For the Norfolk murder of Downing McLean, Beale was convicted and sentenced in August 2024. He received another life sentence. According to court records, the proceedings included victim impact statements from family members. They stood before a judge and described what it means to lose someone to violence, to have your loved one reduced to evidence in a courtroom, to live with absence that never heals. Cola Beale will spend the rest of his life in prison. He'll never walk free. He'll age behind bars, isolated from the world, his name remembered only for what he destroyed. That's justice in a legal sense. Accountability. Consequences. But it's not restoration. It doesn't bring Czavi'er Hill back to finish the work she was building. It doesn't give Clifton Baxter the retirement he deserved after 73 years of life. It doesn't return Downing McLean to his family. Justice punishes the guilty. It doesn't resurrect the dead. So what does the story of Czavi'er Hill, Clifton Baxter, and Downing McLean teach us? It teaches us that belief in redemption, while important, requires wisdom. Czavi'er Hill wasn't naive. She was someone building a meaningful life, working to inspire others, pursuing her goals. But she believed in second chances. She extended that belief to someone whose history suggested he hadn't earned it. There's no shame in believing in people. But there's danger in ignoring evidence that someone poses a threat to your safety. It teaches us that our criminal justice system can identify high-risk individuals, but struggles to prevent them from committing future violence. Cola Beale was a registered sex offender with a violent criminal history. Yet he remained free, with access to potential victims, until he killed 3 people. That's a system failure. Not the failure of any single person, but a structural failure in how we approach public safety and offender management. It teaches us that violence ripples outward. 3 people dead means 3 families destroyed. But it also means communities traumatized, friends left with guilt about what they could have done differently, systems forced to examine their failures. And it teaches us something about memory and legacy. No one will remember Cola Beale as anything but a killer. His name will be associated with nothing positive, nothing meaningful. He'll die in prison having contributed nothing of value to the world. But people remember Czavi'er Hill. They remember her as a motivational speaker, as someone who encouraged others, as a woman building something meaningful. That's the legacy that survives. They remember Clifton Baxter as someone who tried to help who extended grace, who believed people could change. They remembered Downey McLean as someone's cousin, someone's family member, someone who mattered. Those are the names that deserve to be spoken. Those are the lives that deserve to be remembered for more than how they ended. The moments before darkness for Czavi'er Hill likely came when she realized the person she'd invested in wasn't who she thought he was, when she recognized danger, when she decided she needed to prioritize her own safety. That moment of clarity, that act of self-preservation, should have been the beginning of her next chapter. Instead, it was her ending. And that's the tragedy at the heart of this case. 3 people who should still be here. 3 lives cut short by someone who decided his feelings, his control, his anger mattered more than their right to exist. 6 days in March 2022. 3 murders. 1 killer, now facing life in prison. The math is simple. The grief is infinite. If this story made you think about the people in your life, about the warning signs you might be ignoring, about that voice inside that says, something isn't right here, listen to that voice. And if you know someone in a relationship that worries you, don't wait. Don't assume they'll figure out. Say something. Offer support. Provide resources. Because the distance between I'm concerned about you and I'm sorry for your loss can be measured in days. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if these stories matter to you, if you believe in honoring victims by telling their stories truthfully, please subscribe to Moments Before Darkness. Because every story we tell is someone's life, and every life deserves to be remembered